Bob Shaw is the production designer of The Gilded Age on HBO. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Bob, I wanted to start by asking you, what if season two was new or challenging compared to season one? Obviously, you kind of established the world of the series in season one and a lot of the locations. But the show is ever expanding. Season two, many new locations, new characters, new sets. So what did you find, particularly unique about this season versus working on season one?
The challenge of this season was to try to be a little bigger than season one. And Bertha is a woman of boundless ambition, and if she's a social climber, she still hasn't reached the summit. So we have to think in terms of what is she going to do next, and what is her next step on the ladder.
Yeah, let's talk about. I feel like we're spending a lot more time in Newport this season. Obviously, we established last year, Bertha wants to have a home in Newport with society. But I feel like we're seeing a lot more of the interiors of their Newport mansion. And I know you shoot on location, so talk about how you wanted, her second home in Newport to look. Did you build any of those sets versus what was shot on location?
Well, in season one, we were using Newport mostly to represent parts of New York houses that we didn't build, and I don't think that Julian was super familiar with Newport, and he was quite captivated when he went there for the first time, and then realized that he wanted to open things up and incorporate Newport as Newport. Um, we didn't build because there were still mansions to be filmed in. It was tricky because we had already used parts of certain mansions to represent New York. So the Elms, which became the Russell's home in Newport, was actually already used. The kitchen that we see as New York is actually the basement of the Elms, and Gladys's New York bedroom is on the second floor of the Elms. So I had to sort of play traffic cop sometimes and say, no, you can't look that way, or you can't see that wallpaper, because it had already been established as part of the New York world.
It's incredible because they feel, even the build sets and obviously the locations that you're working on feel so of a piece. So it's funny to hear what may have been used already, and you have to kind of be careful of that. Another location in episode two, we get, I believe, on the actual tennis casino in Newport, which is a historic landmark. Two really great scenes there. One of the kind of tennis tournament, and another of Mr. McAllister's ball. Talk to us about shooting on location, and also transforming that space. We see it twice in the course of an episode into, kind of a ball space.
Well, we had actually used a bit of it in season one, and again, that was part of one of our early trips as a group to Newport, and didn't have plans for using the tennis center, but we saw it and couldn't resist. The thing that was kind of funny was that we had the daytime tennis scenes, and we had the place all done up with flowers and swags and everything, and then we had the evening party, because the evening party was going to be in very low light, and mostly lit by these couple hundred Chinese lanterns. We didn't change the flowers out because we thought they would just read as like flowers, and we wouldn't really clock them. And they were filming the tennis scene, and the on-set dresser was asked by the director, "Are they going to have different flowers tomorrow? Can I take some of these home?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm sure they'll have new flowers for tomorrow." And we hadn't planned on it. And I was about quarter mile away at the Elms when I heard that were telling everyone that they could take the flowers, and I literally ran down the street saying, "Don't take the flowers." I got there 5 minutes before wrap. If I had gotten there any later, they may have stripped the place bare, and we would have had no flowers for our party.
Are you shooting? That raises a question for me of, when you're shooting these episodes, are you doing them kind of in blocks? So you're filming all of the kind of Newport set scenes at once. How many episodes are you juggling at any given moment that you're kind of working on?
I can't say it's a minimum of three and probably more. And again, we have to keep track of what we've already used. And it's kind of great to go. We did two trips to Newport this year. I think one was a month and one was 2.5 or 3 weeks. And we did the same thing going to Troy, that we were there in the Troy Albany area for about 5 weeks. And if you're used to filming in New York, it's just so easy. You can walk down Bellevue Avenue or drive down Bellevue Avenue and visit 6 sets that are being prepped at the same time. And it was the same thing in Troy, that we would park ourselves somewhere, and I could walk and visit 10 sets that were being prepped. I mean, walking, not having to bother with the car. And it was just a tremendous luxury to be able to film in those towns.
One more question about Newport, at least the setting in the series, is we're introduced to a new character this season, Mrs. Blaine, and the kind of construction and renovation of her cottage is an important plot point. I know there's some description of what the house should look like in the script, because she's working with Larry on kind of bringing light into this rather, what she thinks is a small home. But how much, how do you bring your character touches and details to the space? I mean, obviously it's so intricately, kind of dressed. So how do you kind of bring your touch when you read the character on the page who we've never met before, and start to think about how you want, that house to look and what it tells us and the audience about who she is as a character?
Well, at this point, I'm very, very familiar with the properties in Newport, and the character came up, and the idea was that she married someone thinking that he wouldn't be around for more than a couple of years, and he, hung on for 20. So that already backs us up into the 1860s, and you figure, well, that probably puts us into the 1850s, and the house that we used, which was Kingscote, was considered the grandest and most elegant house in the 1850s. And they really upped the ante by the time we got to the 1890s and the 1880s. So that house was kind of an obvious choice. And that actually was kind of fun. There's one tiny shot of a rendering of what Larry would do to the house. And that was actually sort of based on making it look a little bit more like the real Mrs. Astor's house. Yeah, the name's escaping me at the moment, but Mrs. Astor's Beechwood, right? And so it was really modeled to turn it into Mrs. Astor's house. And actually, Julian, we went back and forth numerous times, and he would do a pass on the script, and I would say, well, that doesn't really reflect this house. And he said, well, what does reflect the house? And I said, well, it's kind of a rabbit warren of tiny rooms. And then the script came back, and that was how he described it. And the idea that would open up the spaces, and why do you have so many tiny rooms? And so that was working with the real location and Julian to sort of make it make sense on the page.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I wanted to ask you, actually, it works right into my next question about your research process, because this season so far, we're talking now, we've seen 5 episodes of the 8. It's a very theatrical season. Obviously, the plot is about, these kind of dueling opera houses, but we also get kind of glimpses into opera and theater of the time. So for example, in the premiere, you kind of transform the Russell household into Marguerite's garden from Faust. What kind of research do you do on what those sets may have looked like at the time? What are you able to find on those productions, and how do you kind of emulate that or kind of go your own way?
Well, the backstory here is that I actually got into being a designer because of a love of opera. And I started going to the opera when I was probably 16 years old, because I played the French horn, and they would always give you orchestral excerpts from operas to play. And I became, very interested in the opera. And when I interviewed for the job before season 1, I actually said to them, "Are you planning on getting into the opera wars?" And they said, "Well, yeah, we'll get into that season 2." So I think the fact that I even knew what the opera wars were, it maybe helped, put me in the position a little bit. But I'm very familiar with all that stuff. I was reading the Victor Book of Opera when I was a teenager. And a very, very, very good friend of mine ended up being a stage manager at the Met. And, he put me in touch with the archivist there. And I was familiar with a lot of the images that he sent. But we got the script, and it said the house was, resplendent with flowers. And the house had already been resplendent with flowers for the at home in season 1, and then for the ball in season 1. And it's like, well, we've got to kick it up a notch. And so it was just an idea I had that we would actually do a set. And it's kind of all springs off of when Mamie Fish walks into the Great Hall, as we call it. And she says, well, this isn't possible. And I thought that, she could have wrapped her mind around the idea that some people hung some flower swags while they were having dinner. But the idea that they put together an opera set with physical scenery and a hanging backdrop and all that was something that would strain belief. So it was all based on Mamie's reaction.
Yeah, I love when the series does that a lot. There's always these really great buttons at the end of the episode, and I love when the production design plays such a part. You know, these banquets. I mean, this season and in this past episode in particular, so many incredible, dinner scenes and just lavish, obviously, production design. I want to ask you more about the Opera Wars because we do get a couple of episodes ago, or maybe last week, a visit to the kind of Met Opera, which is under construction, and we're
Right.
we're on stage with the characters. Where did you shoot that? What location was that? And how much of that was CGI? And how do you kind of work with CGI to kind of take real locations or sets, if you built sets, and then kind of expand out from there?
Well, we work very, very closely with the visual effects team, Douglas Perver and his group. And again, it goes back to season one. They happened to be doing a promotional tour in Philadelphia for the Downton Abbey first film, and I went down to meet Michael Engler, our primary director, and about using that location as the Academy of Music that was scripted in season one. And then I had to say, now a warning, which was, if you're going to get into the Opera Wars in season two, we have to put this in reserve and hold it and not use that for season one. We ended up using the Troy Music Hall because there's really not another European style opera house of that vintage in the country. And so we used bits and pieces of an old movie theater in Albany. And then we built part of our corridors to match really the theater in Albany more than what would have been the old Met. And then we built opera boxes on stage, like they were like 20 feet in the air, and there were a big curve with 5 opera boxes. And as I always explain it, visual effects had to take our set and slide it between the first and second balconies of the Philadelphia Academy of Music as if it were a giant cassette, because the tone of the opera house was perfect, but it didn't really have boxes. So the whole story is about having boxes. So we had to build boxes separately and then insert them into the Academy of Music. And I was very happy with the way it turned out. Douglas and his team did an amazing job.
Yeah, it's beautiful to look at. I love that shot. I think it's in the trailer, and then we saw it in the past week of Bertha standing on the stage and the chandelier illuminating. It's just a beautiful shot.
And again, that was a question of that's a plate shot that was done in Philadelphia, and then the stage of this movie theater in Albany, and then we built 2 columns, which would have been similar to what was at the side of the Academy of Music, and then we had to measure it and make it fit. So since everything had to slot into other things, we had to make sure the measurements were correct.
This season, we're also spending a lot of time in Tuskegee with Peggy. I wanted to ask you a similar question about where did you shoot those, what location, and how much of those sets, in the last episode, we saw the dormitory that Booker T. Washington is opening. How much of those sets were found? Did you have to construct any of those exteriors? What was that process like of discovering Tuskegee?
We were extremely fortunate that our location for our back lot in Bethpage, Long Island, is right next door to, I forget the full name, it's the Bethpage Village Restoration, Recreation. It wasn't actually originally a town. There was a plot of land, and then buildings were acquired from other places, and they were put together in what would be a town. And prior to us using it, it was used for the show Dickinson, which then had finished up, and the place was available. So literally, it was only I don't think it's even a quarter mile away from where our back lot set was. It was just sitting there waiting for us. And we really didn't build anything of Tuskegee. We built part of the lower half of the dorm, and then again, the visual effects team extended it and made it into a full building.
We have a couple more episodes in season 2 left. I'm sure you can't tell us where the season is heading, but I do want to ask you, whether it's in the episodes that we saw or the episodes to come, do you have a favorite location that you worked on where all the pieces just kind of came together exactly as you wanted it, and you were just kind of particularly happy with how it turned out?
Well, when you'll see how the Opera House pays off eventually, I was very happy, very excited about it, and I texted David Crockett, our producer, and Michael Engler and Douglas Perver, and said, I'm very excited about the way this looks. And I said, and as you know, I don't generally do excited. I mean, I usually say that's very nice, or that's fine, or you know, or sometimes they'll say, well, that looked better than it had a right to. So that the way that came together was very, very satisfying. And as far as the things that were fun to do, I think we've already seen George's private train car,
Yes.
and again, that it's the great thing about being on this show that our problems is occasionally time, but they always allow us to use the resources and put all the detail that's required. They you know, HBO went in, you know, for the whole game, and sometimes we don't have enough time, or we don't think we have enough time to get something finished, but we're always, you know, allowed to do it the way it should be done. And there's kind of a crazy amount of detail in that one train car. And when Michael Engler saw it, he said, "I think it's the tufting on there's, you know, there's fabric on the curves that go up toward the ceiling." And I saw a lot of research, and it was all tufted fabric. So we did tufted fabric, and we had uh, the uh, um, the carpet woven for, you know, it's very similar to the carpet that's in the Brooke Van Ryn house. And Lisa Scapa, our decorator, found a company that reproduced what would have been the accurate overhead lighting fixtures, because they were gas or kerosene, and they had to have a vent to let the fumes out through the roof, so that no one is, you know, passed out while they were in the train. But she found a company that made them. So it's just fun.
Yeah, the attention to detail is just absolutely impeccable. And speaking of, before I let you go, I would be remiss if I didn't mention your Emmy win for you and your team for production design and your collaborators for season one. Take us back to that moment. What does that recognition mean to you for this series in particular, for you and your colleagues?
Well, I mean, at the time I said I've worked with many crews over the years, but I don't think I've ever worked with any group that was more dedicated and more committed to doing things right. I mean, the work that our scenic artists do is just amazing. And the idea that in the Russell House the marble's mostly painted, and they did just a brilliant job. And things that our carpenters would build, that if you were building a house, it would be hard pressed to find somebody who knew how to build things that way. And it was gratifying to have the team recognized. And of course, everybody wanted us to bring the Emmys into the shop, and a lot of people had their pictures taken posing on the Russell staircase, you know, holding the Emmy. And it was it was just really good to feeling to have, you know, this recognition for everybody, because everybody just did an amazing job.
Yeah, it's incredibly well deserved. Bob Shaw, congratulations on the Emmy. Congratulations on the second season of The Gilded Age. Thank you so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Sure. Thanks.